Lucy Letby, serial killer. Why did she kill? Part 15. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. We're now going to work our way through the sentencing remarks, as not only may this provide us with further information about what Lucy Letby is, but it might also help you form your own minds as guided by the judge in terms of what the High Court judge had to say about it all. The defendant, Lucy Letby, has refused to attend court for this sentencing hearing. Accordingly, I have to sentence her in her absence. I shall deliver the sentencing remarks as if she was present to hear them, and I direct that she is provided with a transcript of my remarks and copies of the victim personal statements read to the court. Pausing there, Letby failed to attend court for sentencing. What might we infer from that? Was that perhaps the haughty and dismissive response of a particular type of narcissist that simply didn't care and decided, I'm not bothering? Does that sit with the general demeanour and behaviour that Letby had put forward? Or is that either a deviation from her normal behaviour or something that doesn't entirely sit with the way that she presents herself to the world? Might it be that one would expect a narcissist to attend, to draw in the fuel in terms of what the judge had to say? Some of you may well be familiar with circumstances where you, having perhaps realised what you were dealing with, shouted at the narcissist and entered into a lengthy tirade against them, listing all of their transgressions. I know I have spoken to clients who have explained that there are instances where they were on the telephone, for instance, to the narcissist, or they were talking to the narcissist in person, and they were really laying into them, really letting them have it. And they remember thinking at the time, if this was the other way around, I'd have put the phone down, or I'd have just walked off. I wouldn't have stood and took it. And they found it strange how they did. Now, of course, they're delivering challenge fuel, but certain provocative narcissists love the fact that you're losing your shit in front of them, that you're calling them names, that you're lashing out at them. Their narcissism, of course, enables them to dismiss you, and they drink in all the fuel nevertheless. Other narcissists don't like it. Sure, they'll take the fuel, but particularly those that operate a particular facade don't like to be denigrated in that way. And they'll continue to receive it because they take the fuel, but they'll look to interrupt, they'll look to plead their case. And in some instances, they may well put the phone down or remove themselves as a means of asserting control. A psychopath would want to gloat in what they had done. They would want to look about the court, surely for the purposes of seeing the misery that has been caused, the sobbing parents, all eyes on them in terms of the chaos that they've created, and that they could look upon the worlds of those people that have come crashing down, ignited, and are burning to the ground. A psychopath would be more likely to want to witness and drink in the fruits of their destruction. Was her activity another fuck you to all involved? A haughty and arrogant response? Or was it that of a cowardly narcissist that could not handle the fact that she had now been convicted and was going to be sentenced? The anticipation, of course, being that not only would she receive life sentences, but she would receive whole life orders, meaning that she would spend the rest of her life in prison. Was that such a massive challenge to her, notwithstanding the delivery of fuel, but such a massive threat to control, the fact that her liberty was being taken away from her for the rest of her life, with all of the exposure that goes with that, the exposure to former colleagues, the exposure to the parents that she claimed that she sought to help, the exposure in front of her parents once again, although they, of course, decided that they weren't going to attend the sentencing either, exposure to the waiting world that was watching the sentencing remarks, that it was aware of the conviction and wanted to find out what the judge would say and what his judgment and sentence would be? Was it the case that all of that became too much to handle for Lucy Letby, so that instead she asserted control by staying away, by remaining in a position of withdrawal, a coward, unable to handle this massive threat to control? Various considerations for you to apply as we get closer to the conclusion. Continuing now with the sentencing remarks. Lucy Letby, over a period of almost 13 months between June 2015 and June 2016, when in your mid-20s and employed as a neonatal nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital in Chester, with specialist training in intensive care, you murdered 7 babies and attempted to murder 6 others, in the case of one of them trying on separate occasions 2 weeks apart to murder her. You are now to be sentenced for your crimes. I order payment of the statutory surcharge in the appropriate amount. Note, a 13-month period, which again, keep in mind my observations about how that impacts upon a suggestion that there was a external stressor reducing emotional empathy. You acted in a way that was completely contrary to the normal human instincts of nurturing and caring for babies, and in a gross breach of the trust that all citizens place in those who work in the medical and caring professions. This certainly underpins an absence of accountability and an absence of emotional empathy. The babies you harmed were born prematurely, and some were at risk of not surviving, but in each case you deliberately harmed them, intending to kill them. In your evidence, you said that hurting a baby is completely against everything that being a nurse is, as indeed it should be. You also claimed you never did anything that was meant to hurt a baby, and only ever did your best to care for them. That was but one of the many lies you were found to have told in this case. Thus, it was found that she had repeatedly lied. Lies are the hallmark of psychopaths and narcissists. Other people lie, but on the scale that she did so and the extent to which she did, the depth of the lies that she engaged in, unlikely that somebody with emotional empathy at some point would ever engage in such behaviour. There is no doubt that you are intelligent and outwardly were a very conscientious, hard-working, knowledgeable, confident and professional nurse. Was this all simply part of the facade, which enabled you repeatedly to harm babies on the unit without arousing suspicion for some time? You prided yourself in your competence. Your fellow neonatal nurses spoke very highly of you, and several of them became your close friends. Having started as a Band 5 nurse at the Countess of Chester in 2012, you became a mentor to student nurses. Gained this part of the facade management as opposed to actually genuinely wanting to help people. And in the spring of 2015, gained the qualification that enabled you to care for the sickest babies on the unit, or those requiring the most intensive care. You relished being in the intensive care nursery. Your messages to colleagues revealed an interest in babies that were on or were coming to the unit who had uncommon medical conditions. This level of interest, this relish that she exhibited, was this simply because that behaviour accorded with her cognitive empathy, her fake empathy, that it allowed her to extend her facade? Or was this the cold and cynical behaviour of a psychopathic predator who set out to identify the most vulnerable and the weakest simply because it would entertain her to snuff out their life? On the one hand, was this someone that was seeking the drama which would provide fuel, the attention that would come with that, the praise for saving babies, the drama and grief associated with the loss of life of a newly born child, all part of facade management and fuel of acting without accountability and behaving in a manipulative fashion? Or was it simple thrill-seeking, that surge of power felt from playing God with regard to the decision as to whether somebody lived or died. The methods you employed to carry out your murderous intent were only revealed by the later detailed investigation into the events of and surrounding the collapses and deaths of the babies which commenced in 2018. There was premeditation, calculation, and cunning in your actions. Does this hint at somebody who knew full well what they were and what they were doing? You specifically targeted twins and latterly triplets. See my earlier observations in that regard. Some babies were healthy, others had medical issues of which you were aware. The great majority of your victims suffered acute pain as a result of what you did to them. Is that knowledge of them suffering acute pain something that you would draw fuel from? Or is it just simple sadism? They all fought for survival. Some, sadly, struggled in vain and died. You used a number of different ways to try to kill them, thereby misleading clinicians into believing the collapses had, or might have had, a natural cause, or were a consequence of a developing medical condition. You took opportunities to harm babies when staff were on breaks or away from babies. On some occasions, you falsified records to indicate there were signs of a deterioration before a collapse occurred. See my earlier points about the tampering of records. You knew that the last thing anyone working in the unit would or did think was that someone caring for the babies was deliberately harming them. As the number of unexpected and unexplained collapses and deaths escalated, senior doctors started to think the unthinkable and consider the possibility that someone was, in fact, deliberately harming the babies, and you were identified as the common factor. You had a detached enthusiasm for the resuscitations and what followed. Notice the word detached used by the judge as he picked up on the aloofness of the defendant, identifying an absence of emotional empathy. The enthusiasm for the resuscitations. Again, is this because of the fuel that was being provided in relation to them, or was it the simple thrill-seeking? You endeavoured to impress colleagues and clinicians and sought reassurance from them as to your competence and skills. Is that the necessity of receiving fuel and asserting control? Is this so as a particular flavour of narcissist in having to seek such assurances? Might this militate against a certain type of narcissist or psychopath who wouldn't seek such reassurance because they would know best? On occasions, your cruelty and callousness was revealed by making inappropriate remarks to some of the grieving parents at the time of or in the immediate aftermath of a death. See my earlier comments in that regard. When the homes of both you and your parents were searched, confidential documents relating to babies, including handover and resuscitation sheets and notes and blood gas readings, were found, and there were entries in a diary recording relevant events. Handover sheets relating to all but the first 4 of the babies had been taken from the unit and kept by you. Lack of boundary recognition, appropriation of materials, sense of entitlement. I'm satisfied you started to keep these documents after those initial offences in June 2015 as morbid records of the dreadful events surrounding the collapses of your victim and what you had done to them. Is this simple gathering of information to nullify a threat to control, or was this some form of trophy gathering? You had a fascination with the babies and their families, which extended to making repeated searches on Facebook for their parents, sometimes immediately following the events and on occasions much later. See my earlier observations about that. A piece of paper with dense writing on both sides setting out your thoughts and feelings was found in the first search of your home in 2018. Amongst the phrases you wrote were, "The world is better off without me," and "I am evil. I did this." See my observations in part 11 with regard to those handwritten notes. Already, the judge's sentencing remarks are resplendent with observations that assist us with the determination of what she is. I'll allow you to digest what you've heard, and then in the next part, we will continue with the finalisation of the judge's sentencing remarks and what they tell us.